It's been 3.5 hours since the polls closed here in Louisville, Kentucky. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Courier Journal's continuing coverage of Election Night 2020. I'm Kirby Adams, along with Joe GERTH, here in the Courier Journal building in downtown Louisville. And we're joined again by Morgan WATKINS and by Joe SONKA. And Morgan, let's start with you right away. So you've just been listening to Mitch McConnell's victory speech. Give us your thoughts. And put on your mic.
Hey guys.
There you go. Take two.
Yes, so he spoke in Louisville alongside his wife, U.S. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao. He talked about, definitely expressed gratitude to Kentucky. You know, he talked about how he never imagined having such a long and successful career, and basically that Kentucky's support changed his life. He also kind of really hit on a common theme in his campaign, which clearly resonated with Kentucky voters, which is him saying, look, I look out for middle America, and they're giving me another 6 years in office so that I can make sure that, you know, the working people in America who, you know, are farmers and miners and who just, you know, live in smaller towns around the country have a voice in Congress. He also talked a bit about the coronavirus and kind of a somewhat of a unity kind of message, a little bit coming from him, just in terms of saying, you know, that we're facing these big challenges, particularly with the coronavirus, and ultimately those challenges don't care about our political divisions, and just kind of talked a bit about, you know, America's going to beat this. We'll be able to pull together and make a comeback. And that's what he's going to, you know, try to use his leadership to do. So that's definitely what he talked about. Certainly a little more unifying than how he was talking at his earlier election rallies over the last week, where he was really just sort of hammering Democrats for being radicals and that kind of thing.
Did you get the impression from his speech that this was kind of a valedictory address? Like he's looking at this being his last term, or could you tell anything from it?
I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that, but I mean, he definitely was taking a look back. I mean, I will say that his speech definitely had sort of a longer lens, where he talked about all the way back to when he was just an intern in Washington, D.C., and talking even about his battle as a child with polio. So he definitely was reflecting on his career as a whole, and how far he's come over the years with the support of Kentucky, not just keeping it. It wasn't just focused on his last 6 years in office. So I will say that, but you know, I'm not going to predict if he'll ever run again, or if this will be the last round for him.
One of the things that we were talking about here in the back here at the Courier Journal was that the race was called with what it seemed at the time a rarely low percentage of the votes in. How does that work?
Well, basically what the Associated Press does when they're calling a race is they look at polling, they look at trends from past elections. And if they're looking at a state like Kentucky that has elected Mitch McConnell with fairly large margins for the past 30 years, they combine that into a model, and then they're able to call races quickly. In Arkansas tonight, for instance, as soon as the polls closed, they called it for Donald Trump in the presidential race. But with 0% of the precincts reporting. But at the same time, they know what some of the numbers are, and they're starting to feed them into their system, and that's how they make their decision. You're not going to see them making a decision in Florida, for instance, with 15% of the vote in. They're going to wait. They're at 93% now, and they'll be 99 or 100% before they call that race.
Do you think that will actually happen tonight?
Could possibly, but I doubt it.
Yeah. Not a fair question to ask you, but
yeah.
I think everybody wants to know.
Well, I mean, if you look back to 2000, that was well after midnight that the first call was made in that, and so they're studying the number now. I can promise you, and they'll make a call as soon as they feel comfortable.
Morgan, what about Amy McGrath? Has she made any speech at this point, or is she just kind of quiet?
I was actually just checking on that because I haven't seen one from her. She didn't have an election night party, kind of citing in part just, or in big part, just saying, look, there's a pandemic on and we're not going to have a party, which normally you might have one and that's where you'd have reporters waiting to hear from her. But I'm checking. I don't see anything on Twitter from her, and I don't see any statement in my inbox. But I do expect her to put out some statement. It just hasn't come out yet.
Yeah. Well, you can check that as we talk to Joe SONKA. How about that? Because Joe, you've been covering the Kentucky State House races, and what's happened since we talked to you about 2 hours ago?
It is looking like a bloodbath. Republicans are beating Democrats all over the state. To some extent, Democrats were expecting that this might happen in some of the open seats where the incumbent wasn't running for re-election, and it was a very Republican trending district with Trump at the top of the ticket. But it's much worse than that because the Democrats hoped that there would be a firewall in the suburbs and they could knock off incumbents like Representative Jason Means or Kevin Bratcher in Louisville. Both of those incumbents won easily. It looks like Republicans are even going to hold on to Stan Lee's old seat in Lexington, which has been trending blue. So it looks like Democrats are going to have 0 pickups and Republicans might have as many as 11. So Republicans might have a 73 to 27 majority after tonight is done, which basically means that the Republican caucus is going to vote on bills, and it doesn't really matter what happens on the floor because their majority is going to be so large.
And Joe GERTH, back here.
Yes.
You've been following the presidential race. Anything that's popped up in the last few moments that we need to know about?
Well, what's interesting to me is Texas, which is seesawing back and forth. There's 73% of the vote in there now. Donald Trump has a lead of just 17,000 votes. Just a few minutes ago, Biden had a lead of 40,000 or so. So we're looking at a tight race there. Florida is another tight race. Trump has the lead there by about 3% of the vote. They've got 93% of the vote counted there. Biden's leading is North Carolina with 80% of the vote in. With 62% of the vote in Ohio, Biden has a lead. So we still have a long way to go in a lot of these races, though. So we'll see what it looks like at the end of the night.
This is a question for any of you, but with all the early voting that was going on, and we touched on this maybe a couple of hours ago, maybe 3 hours ago, but just with all the early voting that took place, did it seem to make any kind of a difference in the way the politicians were running their campaigns?
Maybe. I mean, I guess yes, in the sense of I think that it just forced them to kind of change up or just kick their get out the vote efforts into high gear earlier, right? You weren't able to wait until a week before election day or even 2 weeks before. We were like a month out and people were getting their absentee ballots and filling them out. So, I do think that it kind of turned the get out the vote thing as opposed to being a, really hardcore press in the last couple weeks. Instead, it was I'd say the last month or two of them already, urging people to get their mail-in ballots and request them and stuff like that. So that was interesting to see. But ultimately, I think you saw a lot of politicians really embracing it in terms of just being like, yeah, hey, look, you have all these different ways you can vote this time around. So there's no excuse not to. Here's how to do it. I did see a lot of voter education efforts. Amy McGrath's campaign did this a lot, just trying to say, hey, here's step by step how you get a mail-in ballot, how to make sure you fill it out right so that it counts. They seemed like they really wanted to make sure people knew what they were doing.
Yeah. And how to track your ballot as well too. That was the first time I'd ever heard that much information about how to track your ballot, which I thought was very interesting. Well, I think a lot of voters really appreciated it all the time they had to vote. Maybe the politicians enjoyed it as well. I don't know. I guess that remains to be seen. All right. Any last little bits of information we need to know in this cut-in, or else we'll see you back here at 10:30?
One thing that might just be worth noting for anybody who is interested in sort of how the McConnell's Senate race shook out. I mean, the full results aren't in yet, but when I was looking it over a little bit ago, I mean, it looks like McConnell really, rural voters showed out for him in a huge way. He's leading in Kenton and Campbell counties in northern Kentucky, which are two counties that went for Governor Andy Beshear, a Democrat, last year. So the idea for McGrath to win was, she really needs to big win in those northern Kentucky, suburbs of Cincinnati, but those counties
where she's originally from.
And right now it looks like they're going with McConnell. Oldham County, where Beshear almost beat Governor Matt Bevin last year. Oldham County has a 58% for McConnell right now. So, she won. She's leading big in Jefferson and Fayette County, which we expected. And she's leading in Franklin County. But right now, it's basically just a sea of red on the map for the Senate race. So it looks like McConnell, did what he needed to do and picked up some stuff that Andy Beshear was able to pull off in 2019 when he was running against what appears to have been a more unpopular politician than McConnell in terms of Matt Bevin. It certainly seems tonight like plenty of Kentuckians are perfectly happy with McConnell.
Joe, Sonka, any last thoughts?
I think Allison Lundergan Grimes looks good in comparison to Amy McGrath in terms of her performance tonight.
Although Grimes didn't have to deal with a President Trump on the ballot in Kentucky also.
Very true.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time and your insight. We'll talk with you again at 10:30. We'll be back here again on Facebook Live and courierjournal.com. See you then.